This is Regenerative Skills, the podcast helping you to learn the skills and solutions to create an abundant and connected future. I'm your host, Oliver Gaucher. Through their diverse range of publications, New Society Publishers' books explore topics that are at the forefront of creating positive change in our world. From regenerative agriculture and permaculture to social justice and eco-conscious living, their books cover a wide spectrum of subjects that empower readers to lead more regenerative and fulfilling lives. Now, whether you're a seasoned environmentalist, a curious beginner, or someone simply seeking inspiration and guidance on your journey towards regenerative living, New Society Publishers is here to support you every step of the way. Now, exclusively for listeners of this podcast, you can use the code SKILLS25 and receive a 25% discount on all ebooks at newsociety.com. That's all one word and lowercase, SKILLS25 on all ebooks. So level up your knowledge today at newsociety.com. Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. So, as this summer is starting to come to a close, I'm beginning to prepare for another high season of site assessments and water retention landscape installations that are coming up this autumn. As we start to approach the rainy season in the Mediterranean and in the Iberian Peninsula, our clients are keen for us to get digging in order to catch as much water and infiltrate it into the soil before next year's inevitable dry period arrives. Now, as the team and I collaborate and start setting travel plans and finalize dates for teaching events, I love checking back in with the interviews that I've done with people who have inspired me to pursue this line of work and have lit a path of hope by sharing their knowledge and showing what's possible with informed and insightful earthworks and landscape design. Now, one of my favorites that I continue to look up to and learn from is David Spicer, who is affectionately known as Doc Spice, an accomplished permaculture designer who has specialized in earthworks installation. Now, having taught and worked on various projects extensively in Australia and internationally in places like Morocco, Jordan, Palestine, and New Caledonia, Doc has worked in a broad array of different soil types, topographies, and climate zones too. Now, he's also a valued member of the Permaculture Sustainable Consulting team headed up by Geoff Lawton and is registered as teacher number 5 with the Permaculture Research Institute of Australia. Now, Doc is a master of practical and logical mainframe permaculture design, and he has pioneered the design of water harvesting and storage earthworks, which frames all regenerative farming. In this episode specifically, we talk about why it's so important to invest early on a project to get your earthworks right, because of what it can mean for the health of your land. Doc also shares some insights on his personal design process and what he looks for in a landscape to give him clues as to the most effective interventions on the form of the land. We also cover some of the risks of improperly installed features, the need to draw from as many sources of knowledge as possible, and he also gives some valuable advice for people who are new to earthworks on how to get started. Now, I've put some pictures of the projects that Doc has done to help to illustrate some of the concepts and techniques that he talks about, so don't forget to check out these along with further links on the show notes in this episode on the website. And now I'll hand things over to Doc Spice. Hey Doc, thanks so much for making time today for being on the podcast. It's really a pleasure to finally speak to you. I've followed your work for a while. How are you doing in Australia at the moment?
Good, mate. In the middle of winter, but I'm sitting on a nice rocket mass heater, so I've got warm bones.
Oh, perfect. That's nice, man. Those things are fantastic. I got to get back and do another interview about those things. I just got a new book on rocket mass heaters from Erica Weisner and Ernie Weisner called The Rocket Mass Heater Builder's Guide. It's a really good volume. I recommend it. How's that one performing for you? Did you build it yourself?
Yeah, I built it myself. I actually added the firebox to it, like the batch box sort of mass heaters. But look, it's incredible. It's transformed the house. It's reduced our, firewood costs by 40%, 50%, depending on the year and the wood quality. But it's just incredible. We love it.
Yeah, so you added on the batch box feature. See, I started doing that when I was doing stoves in Guatemala, and it makes a really big difference, doesn't it?
It does in the sort of management of it. You can put more wood in.
You don't have to constantly be attending it.
Exactly, mate. Exactly. Yeah. It's more functional, more practical. But, it's incredible.
Well, look, I would love to talk rocket mass heaters with you this whole time, but what do you say we get to what you're best known for, which is earthworks and landscape transformation? Now, I know that landform is the second highest category on the scale of permanence, and regular listeners to this podcast will have heard me talk about the scale of permanence quite a bit. But my question for you is, why is it so important to invest early and really get it right with the landform aspect as far as the health of your land as you start to move forward with your design?
Well, I suppose I see what I do and any sort of manipulating landforms, because that's what I do basically is, I try to do the smallest amount of work for the greatest good. And I see that as, or I like to explain it as, you're building the bones of the system. And then all the living flesh is the muscle and, the skin, etc. And that's how I see earthworks. But sort of reading the landscape is really the first sort of critical point. Observation, I think, is the most important skill set if you want to transform landscape in particularly in an earthworks manner. You need to develop your observation skills to look at land, to look at the shape of it, erosion patterns, etc., to work out what's going on. What's the most economical fix, the bang for your buck that you can do? Because everything I do costs a lot of money when you're dealing with heavy machinery. So you've got to try to be quite precise with your movements.
Yeah, and I've heard that echoed from a lot of people, especially because it is so high on that scale of permanence. We're dealing with things that are quite difficult to make any real change on without larger equipment or without a ton of manpower. And, you're talking about the observation process, and there's a lot of things on the landscape that you need to take into account before you start going in and doing some work. Tell me, how do you assess a new site for its water harvesting potential? What are some of the things that you look for first?
Well, absolutely. One I look for is any roads above the site, because if you can get that is absolute gold in the runoff events coming off sealed roads, particularly. I'm looking at where is sort of is there any neighbouring properties that run in? Where's the biggest catchment coming in from the different valleys? You've got to look at also landscape and what was this, how was the site treated? It has got rock formations, and even I've been working on a site in Gingelic. Now it's quite big country in that it's from the valley floor to the ridge, it's 600 metres and almost on a 70% sort of grade. Like it's incredibly steep country, but rock formations has made a big difference in its shale country. But if the rock strata is standing up, it actually builds quite incredible fertile soil and very little runoff. As soon as the rock strata changes, everything just sheds off. And that's in the sections that the water's shedding off, we're doing a lot of what I call shock absorber work in putting water into a swale system, really so it could just take its energy out and then passively overflow a spillway. And also when you do that, you're allowed to deposit, to become a deposition system and build soil and bank the water. Yeah, like I think, is the site forested? What are the land practices above the site, in the water catchment? What are the farmers doing above it is a big one to think about. In Australia, we've got to think that, in February, we had horrendous fires. And on this site in Gingelic, the fire went through. So there's an incredible amount of material that moves through these landscapes after the fire and some big rain events. So we've had a lot of work to do there. But at the same time, the client's been doing holistic for 4 years, and there's still almost an inch of organic matter on the soil after the fire had passed in certain places, as a testament to the benefits of these grazing systems, but also how resilient nature is. I always like to say we only got to take one step in the right direction, nature takes 10. And I've seen that so many times, and often that can be, planting the water or interacting livestock or, anything like that in a positive manner.
Yeah, and like you said, so we're talking a lot about water systems when we're dealing with earthworks, because that's often the main intention of why someone would bring in heavy machinery and make adjustments in the land. But let's talk about the full range of what a properly planned and implemented earthworks project kind of has the potential to do in transforming a landscape, both including water catchment and any of the other services that you've been able to do with this type of work?
Yeah, look, I think basically we've got to become human beavers. When I think, like, yes, we can bring in, well, first we've got to have an observation on the landscape, look at the rain event, look where the water's moving on the site. And, there's a whole host of indicators to that too. Like, has there been any, organic debris put up in trees or on fence lines? Because that's an indicator. Is there any steps in the country? Slump country you have to worry about, like dispersive clays. And again, that's observation because you can look at the profile and see that doesn't quite look right. But we need to start at the top and slowly impound the water. Now, obviously, the most economical place is the soil. So if we can bank it in the soil, then we've spent the least amount of time, money and energy often to store that water. Now, if we store that water high and, we'll eventually be create new springs. And I've seen that across so many sites when we bank the water up high. And it doesn't have to be with earthworks, but just good land management. Even take a degraded forest and start cycling that down, the lesser quality species in that forest, and start cycling that down on a contoured form or a keyline form, you're going to start banking huge amounts of water in that. So it's like water retention doesn't have to be just about big scale earthworks too. It's surprising what can be achieved by hand, when it comes to earthworks and just planting that water. And Brad Lancaster's been incredible in leading that sort of path for years, really. He's one of my sort of heroes, I suppose, and such a gentle guy. And so I think, we need to, I come into this game as from a permaculturist perspective, and we need not to be permaculturists. I sort of really try seriously to always take on new information. And if I see something that works, I add it to the toolkit. Like in Australia, we have Peter Andrews doing natural sequence farming, which is great, but that's only for the floodplains, whereas we need to apply, we need to force water out onto ridge points to rehydrate them. So, there's so many from large scale to small scale scenarios that we can take on to hold more water in the landscape. And it takes just a little bit of will and a little bit of knowledge and trial and error. We need to, our education system in the Western world, particularly, I think, they've knocked innovation out of us and we're scared to fail. So you don't want to fail definitely on large scale earthworks. And that's where laser levels and surveying is critical before earthworks, during and after. But, like the smaller scale stuff is stuff to really play with and build up your confidence and your understanding. Water is very easy to work with. I don't see myself as, unique in my smartness for what I do. I don't. I just understand that water, if you hold water on level or you put a slight fall on it, but if you run it in storage, it's just a matter of playing with heights to get water to go where you want. I can get water to run into a dam and then back flood up. And that's just in relation to heights, by surveying, So, I really...
Yeah, it's good like that. Like water is very predictable. It very rarely does anything that you couldn't have planned for.
Yeah, definitely in a water harvesting storage in the landscape, certainly when it comes to sort of, creek systems, well, they're more volatile. And, I've played with that sort of leaky weir idea, but I'm certainly not an expert on that. Like, I suppose I've become more knowledgeable on, actual jumping on the machine, like doing the design, jumping on the machine and actually doing the work. And I've learned a lot by doing the work myself on the excavator. It's a bit bone rattling. It's hard work, but the results are quite incredible. And the work I've done in Morocco has been, for me, very rewarding. One of the projects I've worked on was in the High Atlas, and so we only had a JCB and we'd done a swale as a shock absorber, so reading the landscape. It was like 60-degree slope coming down to the school, and it flooded on a 250 mil rainfall, like per annum. But the school was flooded, which is kind of hard to believe in a 250 mil rainfall, yearly event, like over the annual year. But like by doing that and also doing smaller scale stuff, these kids have actually taken that skill set to their own farms. And that is just fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
That is fantastic. By demonstration, the word educate in Latin means to lead out, to demonstrate the way. And I think that's the most important thing that we can do. We can talk all we want, but we really need to start demonstrating and showing people how simple what we do is, and it's fun, and it's so powerful to build life systems, because that's what we're doing.
Yeah,
we're
it
building
certainly
life
is.
systems, and we're just we're coming in as the initiator and just a traffic director, really, like pruning a tree. It's just steering traffic. And I think looking at a whole system, looking at the overall site, is like steering traffic. Now, if you start with water and you work out where the water is going, where you can store the water, where you can move the water, and then that gives you your bones of your structures, and you can put your roads on and your structure position and your fence layout or your forestry layout. It really, for me, what earthworks, I think the simple thing about them does is once you put an earthworks layer on your site, it designs itself, because it already starts to cut it into sections. You start to know, that's zone.
Right.
That's zone 4. That's forestry. You know what I mean? Like it really starts to divide land up, and it's so much easier for people to manage, I think, because particularly people new to farming, not necessarily old farmers, people new to farming, homesteading, all that. When you look at a big space with no trees on it and it's a big blank canvas, it's really hard to envision what is possible and where to stop and start. And I think the most powerful things that good earthworks can do is it sections up the land. Now, Mark Shepherd, I was watching a podcast the other day of Mark, and he's giving a keyline presentation, and he talks about this sweet spot, which I absolutely agree with him, because I'm finding the more design work I do, there's this sweet spot often in the middle of the site, depending on topography and shape, But if we do our research and we can purchase a property with a bit of topography, then you can find this sweet spot that it's the least amount of earthworks for the greatest amount of water harvesting and often storage potential. Whether that could be a gradient road, or I'm starting to actually do a lot more terracing in the form of swales. So they're on level, but they're in the form of a terrace with a tilt on them. So they're almost up for 300-400 mil in the freeboard. So on the bottom side of the terrace is 400 millimeters higher than the back of the terrace. So that's where the water sits, like a swale. But I'm just finding I'm evolving my system, because I'm finding that this terrace form is easier to maintain over time than the classic swale form, But I'm also doing a lot.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
Yeah, no, they really are. I'm really finding that. So, even though I come in as a permaculturist and, I just see like Zach Weese's work, the elemental ecology ecosystems, like it's just fantastic stuff. And you've got to go, wow, that works. Peter Andrews' systems works, Brad Lancaster's, Mark Shepherd's, Darren Doherty's, we need to collect as much, stuff that we gel with and just try it on small scale and build our confidence to go out in big scales. Start small, make small mistakes is a big thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's classic and very good advice. And one of the things that you mentioned just a minute ago about building these skills and adding more of them from the toolboxes of as wide of a, spread of learning and pedagogies as you can really helps to continue the innovation process. And I'm wondering, in all of this time that you've been learning and practicing these types of designs and implementing them, what are some of the most useful skills that you end up using all of the time and that are fairly easy for someone else to pick up? Assuming that there's some overlap on those, because you might be using pretty complex skills.
No, I'm not. No, I think honestly, observation, read landscapes, that is a real big thing. Like walk, as Warren Brush would say, walk the water, you need to get in the water's mind. Think about, don't just think about the earthworks aspect, because if you're not careful, you cut the property off. You know what I mean? You can't access it once you put in, whether it's swales or gradient roads. You know, you've got a path across there, but you can't go up the slope. So you've got to think about access, think about fence layering. You know, I always advise do a little bit and then come back and do more. It might cost you more for the transport, but you've got to allow, you know, the system to evolve. Bill said, let your site demonstrate its evolution. You know, and that's really true. Like, but I think honestly, get a shovel, learn how to move a bit of earth, you know, play with small systems, like play with stormwater. Yeah, get as many, like I'm very unique, you know, I suppose I've been lucky, or, you know, in some ways I grew up on a farm. I worked in horticulture, I've worked in forestry, I've worked in the building industry, a bit of steel fabrication, forestry, before I come to permaculture. Yeah, before I was even interested in it. So I was very lucky to have a broad array of skill sets. Try to get some practical experience on working systems, working tree systems, you know, because if you're designing, you need to design with, you know, the evolution of tree systems, spacing, access. And that's where Darren does such a fantastic job in the Regenerative system, you know, keeping it quite simple. Adapt. You know, be adaptive. Don't, if you've designed something, don't be egotistical and go, I can't change that because your ego, you know. Be a bit humble. Yeah. I don't know, mate. Try. We need people to get out there and bloody try, you know, because, you know, Bill said, yeah, get out there and try, and because we can't do a worse job. Well, that's true to an extent, certainly, you know, but we need to become more active and demonstrate.
Yeah. Put these things into practice and get away from the theory and the book learning and actually get your hands dirty.
Yeah. No, look, you know, I'd like to get myself into a position where I could take on people to train it, because I have people asking me to come on site. So, and evolution, because I know we need them. I know we need people with this skill set. And I really think you need to try to apprentice yourself to someone for the training, because there's no substitute for experience, you know. Even if you want to work with heavy machinery, you know, try to jump on and operate, because what that does, if you want to work with earthworks, it gives you a realization, is that design reality or not? Because it's too easy to draw a pretty picture and go, let's do that. But until you actually get on the ground and start implementing it, or you come from a operator's perspective and go, oh, wow, that's going to be really costly because, you know, you've got to cut so much out of there to get that. Like, be a bit pragmatic, think of people's dollar, because everything we do with heavy machinery is costly. So we need to try to minimize the amount of time and cubic meters of earth moved for impact, for water stored is the big one. Just question that each time you're on that. You know? Am I putting
right? Are you doing it to do it, or are you doing it with the real goal?
Exactly, mate. No,
having the desired effect.
Yeah, and that's why, like I say, this mainframe concept, because if you can get a mainframe, and that's if you think of ridge to valley floor, if you can get something across the top of the ridge line before it starts getting steep, and something through the mid slope picking up the key point, and whether that's swale, gradient road, whatever, with dam storage, and then something in the bottom, that's enough to kick your system off. And you can always put in more when you do your observation and have more experience with that site. But, you know, there's no point in putting in swale. Why? You know, why not just rip it? Yes, put in swales if you want to harvest water to somewhere. But if you just want to bank the water, it could be other options other than bringing in heavy machinery. These days, I rarely put in a swale as an individual unit. I'll put in a swale as a backflood swale, so it's connected to a dam. So the dam has to fill from the swale before the swale fills up. Okay, so I will do that, right. But I'll rarely put in a swale just to put in a swale, because unless I want to pick water up, bring it around the ridge and drop it off again, unless I want to direct water, you know. But because there's other options, more economic options for people to impound water. And, first we have to look at the soil, and what can we do to the soil to open it up to take the water? We always need to be asking these questions, in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm really glad that you brought up swales, because it's become sort of this controversial thing, especially in permaculture circles, where some people think that swales kind of broadly apply to just about any landscape,
Mm-hmm.
and other people who steer away from them and really try and tell people, like, look, there's a lot of other options. Swales are effective in certain contexts, but not others. Do you think that it's an essential feature for water harvesting, or are there situations where it definitely shouldn't be used?
Yeah, it's certainly situations where it shouldn't be used, and it's not essential for water harvesting. You can do water harvesting by diversion drains. You can do water harvesting by gradient roads, which are bloody incredible at actually directing water to storage. So yeah, there's a whole host of things that you can do before you put in a swale, and then you want to ask too, like, how many swales do I need? Do I only need one swale? Because I only want to take that water and I want to bring it around to that dam, Yeah, so they're not always relevant. Don't get swale centric. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a big thing.
I see it used often as like this indication of the pedagogy of permaculture and the rigidity of certain people's thinking around, because it's in the permaculture manual, or because it was a teaching of Bill Mollison, it is the only way to go. And I really like your approach. And, I've spoken to Darren a few times and quite a few other people who are like, yeah, I mean, those are all good things, but we've learned a lot since then. And there's a lot of new tools and applications and innovations that should be considered now that we have more information and we've got more experience as a community in applying these techniques and these strategies over a lot of different contexts now.
Absolutely, mate. Spot on. Thank you. Yeah. And this is why I take what I do as an evolutionary approach. I see myself as still learning, because I'm looking at, I still watch Earth Movers work, because I'm like, oh yeah, they're doing that. Oh, that's interesting. I'm genuinely interested in learning. And I think the hybridization of all these different approaches in different contexts is a fantastic thing. I actually give my work a form of what I call functional art, because I think it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I do, and it's functional, and I pride myself when I'm doing the work on myself on a machine, is I want to have a finished product that blends into the landscape, that doesn't actually take much longer, but, it's beautiful, but it's also got to be functional, and I'm blending it with different approaches, from a multitude of teachers. And I think we have to take on this approach of opening our minds. Again, it comes back to observation, look, oh, wow, that works. Why wouldn't I use that? That's certainly my approach. And I want to continue with that approach until, I'm an old man. I can't walk around too much. But
yeah,
basically, yeah.
No, I'm right there with you. I completely agree. Like, the real joy in this for me as well is that it's a constant learning process.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how good you get, no matter how much experience you build, you never know the whole picture. You can never understand a living system in all of its complexity. And the challenge then is just to keep paying attention and to constantly be observing to see, what you've missed or what continues to evolve. And it always manages to do so in ways that you could have never entirely predicted, because of all of those variables and elements and nuances in living systems that I just find fascinating as well.
Totally agree, mate. Totally agree. I mean, Bill Mollison said, how can you study man when you study a hermit? You can't. If you study something in isolation, it's going to be different, because it has all these other influences in its natural environment. So, we've got to continue learning. Like, we've got to be open. Try not to get our ego too big. Keep a bit humble is my advice, and you'll go a long way. As my mum would say, have manners, which is another good thing. But yeah, look, be open, because there's so much stuff. I got in December, I went to India for a quick consultancy, and I've seen the work that NGO in India was doing. Now, their work was pretty rough in our sort of standards, like the finished product, not much topsoil or no topsoil sort of reapplied or anything like that. But the effects were absolutely profound, when we started doing that broader watershed restoration. They just transformed the local village's life. And I was in awe of their work. I went there as a specialist, but I can't criticize anything anything they've done, because it was just bloody incredible. There's a few details that I pointed out that you could do, but overall, like, my God, I was just humbled, at the scale of what these guys achieved, and it was just incredible. And I think we've got to keep humble. Humble, you learn, because if you're humble, you're looking, you're observing without prejudice. I think is a big one.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now, I've got one more technical question, because I think it's one of the things that people often overlook when they're thinking about earthworks and, changing the landscape a bit. It's usually done with the context of trying to, I guess, hold and store and redirect more water. But there are quite a few contexts in which the larger issue is inundation and flooding, and where drainage is actually more of a pressing challenge than harvesting.
Yeah.
Can you talk about your experience with working on drainage and making sure that water doesn't become an erosive force?
Yeah, well, look, I haven't done a lot of work on really flat country, but I am just started communicating with a client that he's got 20 acres and there's about a 200 mil fall over it. So, but again, it's just a matter of playing with heights. You can still drain the landscape and move water with a swale or a drain, as long as you've set your heights up right, that you can still manipulate it. As long as one end's higher than the other, of course you can push water and terraform to create higher spots, or use a malboard plow or something simple, economic. Get out there with your shovel, you can still manipulate the water. And just when you come to the point where it exits, I often, if I'm putting in a diversion drain, I think it's a good idea to actually pull that diversion drain up about 10 metres off the dam or something and actually make it into a swale, because then that actually creates a deposition system, so it drops its silt load. So as soon as you take running water and you drop it into still water, there goes all this energy. And that can just passively sheet over some spillway, which could be rock armoured if you're worried about volumes of water coming in. Like Warren Brush does a lot of rock armouring on the spillways of his work. And that's fine, if you've got the rock resource around. But that's taken running water and dropping the running water into a body of water that could be a silt trap, like a deposition system. As soon as that running water hits water, there's its energy gone. It's dissipated. It's like like the Zuni bowls, they go off that spiral sort of vortex, but it's about water hitting water and dissipating the energy.
Yeah. Those are some wild examples for sure.
And, so as soon as your water's, passive, then you put it over a spillway, a level spillway, and that could be, 10 metres long. And you could only have, an inch or 25 mil of water sheeting over that at, incredible, gentle flow, but a lot of volume, because it's long and it's level. So you've dissipated the energy, you've dissipated it, you just split it up.
Yeah.
So that's pretty easy. And that's why I say water is easy to work with. If you respect it like that, bring it in, allow it to deposit its load, what it's carrying, store it if you want. When it exits, you just put it over something level so it's passive.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you don't have any problems. A vegetated area, if you can shed water into a vegetated area over a 10 metre distance or something like that, or 30 feet or something like that, then all the energy's taken out. You won't even bend the grass over.
Let's talk about some of the risks if you get it wrong.
Yep.
Are there some inherent risks or dangers if you don't know what you're doing and start messing around with earthworks?
Of
Have you
course.
seen anything, catastrophic happen?
Look, dams do blow out, absolutely. So that's the dam wall itself. If that's not constructed right, if they don't actually have what's called a freeboard, so from where the water sits in the dam to the top of the dam wall itself, if there's not much freeboard and you get a big rain event, water goes over the wall, makes a small incision that keeps going, that can blow out. And that can be, hundreds and hundreds of cubic meters of soil, hopefully clay, but soil moving down into someone else's property or your property, and you can't get that material back. So there are dangers. Swales and terrace and things like that, well, depending on the volume of water you're picking up, if they blow out, it's not really that much of a drama. You can shovel a wheelbarrow load of material back in there. But when you're dealing with dams, diversion drains, running water, you have to stay on a gentle grade. Don't be greedy, because, you start running water on a too steep of a grade, it's going to start to erode. Different soil types, particularly like granite soils with quite big quartz crystals, is really abrasive country. So you've got to be a bit careful about that. Even roads, putting in roads. You think you're doing the right thing putting in a road. Well, you have to be careful about where you put the road in, because ideally we use them as road water harvesters, to direct water or, harvest water to a dam or something like that. But if we've got to go up a ridge or, around the slope, we just need to be conscious that that's going to pick up water and run. And where does that water go is what you've got to think. It's always a relationship of hardware to software, as our mate Geoff Lawton would say, who's kind of swale-centric, and hopefully he might hear me on that one, but I'll stir him up because that's right. Anyway, yeah, so you got to have a bit of humour in life, mate. Yeah, you've got to. There's a lot of water coming off roads, and you've got to be, can think about that. Where does that water go? Ideally, we want to put it into some sort of storage, because it's water coming off at speed as well that we have to think about. For just, if you understand earthworks, respect the laser. You respect your levels. As long as you give it adequate freeboard and you've got a decent spillway, then a lot of the time everything's okay. I have seen swales in dispersive clay country, and they've worked. There's no tunnel erosion in that, but I have seen tunnel erosion with swales in dispersive clays as well. So, but I wouldn't certainly advise to put swales in dispersive clay country. But, that's probably one of your big things to think about. Some sort of slip country, rock strata, have you got a big, soil plume sitting on a big sheet of rock? If you're saturated, is it going to slip? Is a thing to think about. And, that's why Darren Doherty or someone like that would advise a geotechnician to do work before any preliminary, earthworks, to understand the geology. You should be doing soil tests. Look, over time, depending on the client, sometimes I do soil tests, sometimes I've done work to the client or they've had work done. And, I even look down wombat holes out in the paddock to see the soil profile. Any burrowing animal, just look down there and go, what's going on down there? Saves you digging a hole.
Yeah.
But you need to understand the soil types that you're working in.
Definitely. Now, what are some of the steps that, in your opinion, anyone could take to sort of better manage water on their landscapes? And that could include earthworks, like you mentioned, but it could include things that are more accessible to everybody.
Yeah, okay. Well, if you just think, urban, rural, whichever, but go to the new property, if it's a, urban backyard, if it's an urban backyard, for example, where does your water come off your roof? Where can you get access to wood chips? What kind of biomass can you access? Because if you lay that out in a pattern, that impounds water, that holds up water, that builds soil. You lay a line of wood chips out on a contour pattern and look at the deposition that it creates behind it over time. So simple things like that is quite profound, and it's quite marvellous, I was pulling something off my shed roof the other day, and there's soil that was built from eucalypt leaves over 12 months underneath the oil, aluminium and the tin. So, it doesn't take much. Who cleans their gutters out and realizes how much material is in the gutter? As soon as you put water on a passive form, then it can drop everything it's carrying. It can lay it out for you. So, earthworks doesn't have to be this huge, big job. It's just probably a mindset or as Brad Lancaster would say, plant the water, and again, that can be get a few sticks and lay them down a specific pattern. It plants the water. Watch what happens over time, even a bare spot, organics, gather around and silk materials, manures, seeds, boom, life comes on. It is really quite profound how simple it is. Take your driveway and take the water, because everyone's got a driveway, take the water and shoot it off into the landscape. Plant it in little deposition pits. Again, like use Brad Lancaster's work. That's a simple thing that you can do, because we've all got driveways. Obviously it's harder if we rent, but you've got some space that you can work. It's not hard, and it's very rewarding work to foster life, because that's what we're doing. And we're building a lifeboat, and that's what we need to do pretty smartly. We're here in Australia, we're desertifying quick, smart. And, with the bushfires that we had last year, it's pretty important that we plant the water in this landscape across the globe. As we all know, it's not a great situation, but, we know that we come back with positiveness too. And that honestly is so simple. Lay a stick down on the edge of your driveway and watch materials gather behind it. And there's some real lessons there. It doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't have to be big. We can do it with lots of different ways.
No, not at all. And like you said, those patterns that open up as you observe, they play out in these sort of microcosms, like you mentioned, in urban or suburban lots. And they play out in macrocosms, like on larger landscapes and entire watersheds. And you don't have to go and get, 20 acres in a rural area or more to be able to play with these forms and really maximize. In fact, one of the things that I've certainly learned in my own design experience and working on projects like this is that the smaller the place is, the more carefully you can curate and manage it. And the intensity and the focus that you can put on a small space will give you so much more yields than a huge space that you can't really micromanage in the same way. And there's real advantage in that.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. And, my mind's too simple for the small space. I have to take the broader landscape because it's easier. But it is all about patterns. Absolutely. Because that's all I do is I look at the landscape in a pattern form, look at the water in a pattern form, and then I apply a specific pattern to capture that energy or the surplus energy, an amount of that energy. But that's all it's doing is applying a pattern. And I don't mean that in any esoterical manner. It's a very practical, physical thing. But observation, it starts back to that.
Absolutely.
I cannot emphasize how important observation is, different times a day.
That's what it always all comes back to.
It does, mate. Like different times a day, you see landscape differently. Get up in the morning, middle of the day is actually really hard to see land, particularly in summer, because if the vegetation's dried off, it's quite glary. A full moon is, or a bright moon is really good to look at landscape because it's very soft and you can see shadow lines. Or, early morning, late afternoon is the times to look at landscape. Walk it, feel it, Walk out there on a full moon and listen to the water. Feel the difference in temperature when you go from valley to ridge. Is there a nice thermal belt through that site? Because, again, that's observation, and that can change your influences. And, again, that's the other interesting thing about adding water to the landscape is it's the most effective, thermal mass, isn't it? So we regulate temperature. We moderate the temperature extremes on the site when we plant the water, which is pretty cool where I'm from because I'm, 300 kilometres inland. So we're, we're a continental climate. We get that climatic extreme of winter to summer. So the more water I can plant here, the more moderate my climate's going to become. And I've already noticed the difference with trees, of course, but I have 3 water bodies on my half an acre here, and it's changed how the cold air moves and where I get frost settling. That's a very interesting aspect.
Sure.
But there's a real pleasure.
It's amazing how they all interact, these different factors.
Jeez,
I mean, it's all connected, right? So as you start to work on one element, it definitely affects others. And as you sort of help the successional models along to mature, they sort of all support each other. Just like you were saying in the beginning, you take one step towards nature and it takes 10 steps, towards you, or and it's really inspiring. It's very encouraging, I think, too, for people who are just beginning and who haven't studied this for a long time or haven't got a lot of experience. It's like, man, even just the fact that you're considering these elements and that you're taking the time to understand a bit about pattern and observe these formations and such, you're already doing so much better than most people who are making huge decisions for landscapes. And there's only really so much you can fail when you have those things in mind. Your failures are still going to be a certain level of progress.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. It may be painful, but sometimes we need painful growth, Yeah, look, absolutely. That's why I say start small, make small mistakes. That's the best way to do things, Build your confidence up. Develop your observational skills.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But, starting to understand it, it's fantastic that the people have taken the step.
Yeah. Well, look, I think that's a good place for us to wrap up today. I can tell that we could go on for much, much longer, and we see eye to eye on a lot of things here, but it's been fantastic to finally connect with you. I've been a fan of your work for a long time, and I'm really glad, too, that you mentioned that project from Morocco. I'll try and share the link to the pictures on your website so people can see what you were talking about. I had a look at those myself.
Okay, cool.
Please let me know, for our listeners' sake, where they can find out more information, get in touch with you, see your courses and previous work that you've got online.
I've got a website, docspicepermaculture.com, Facebook page, Docspice Permaculture, and I've got Instagram, docspice_permaculture. You can follow my work. I try to post something regularly when I'm out and about. Yeah, give us a call if you're, some assistance or need some advice. I'm happy to help and inspire, because we need people out there doing this. Even on that baby steps, small scale is absolutely fine, and it's a great way to start. So please get to it, folks. Come on, we need you.
Perfect. Well, Doc, thank you so much for making time. Let's definitely catch up again sometime soon. Maybe we can explore more about rocket stoves, and I wish you the best for the rest of your day, and good luck in your future projects.
Thanks. Take care. All the best.
Now, before we wrap this up, just remember that these episodes are only the beginning of the learning resources, design and coaching services, in-person courses, and interactive community that are available through Regenerative Skills. The Discord server is our free community where you can connect with other like-minded listeners, exchange ideas, stories, tips, and resources, as well as interact with me directly and quite a few former guests from this show. Our Instagram account @regen_skills is the best place to see the projects that me and the team are working on, both for clients and collaborators, as well as on our own properties. I'll also be announcing the certification courses, workshops, and gatherings that we've got coming up later this year. If you're interested in getting dedicated support for your own project, you can now schedule a free planning session with one of our team members through the request form on our website. You can also find all the links, show notes, and past resources there at regenerativeskills.com. We truly believe that no matter your experience, your knowledge, abilities, resources, or background, you can be a powerful force for regeneration on this planet, and we're here to help you find your path. So as always, remember to keep taking those little steps every day towards a regenerative future, and I'll be right by your side along the way.